My sister thought I was her babysitter. One day I got tired and locked my door. She didn't like it. She went to our parents and said I was unstable, a danger. An hour later, a police officer knocked on my door. He was there for a welfare check. And my sister, she had no idea I'd been setting her up all year. I looked at the police officer and said, "Please come in. There's something you need to see."
Beatrice's house seemed to breathe silently. The automatic lights flickered on softly, revealing the balance of wood and glass she herself had designed. Everything there was meticulously calculated. Every angle, every color, every texture. And yet within that perfect space, something weighed heavily. The feeling of always owing something to her own family. An emotional debt she could never repay. During Sunday dinner, the air was charged. Valeria was loud, complaining about the overcrowded daycare center where she worked, and saying she would solve the problem if she could use her sister's house to care for children. Beatrice tried to calmly argue, explaining that her home wasn't suitable for it, but Valeria interrupted, raising her voice in front of her parents, who only sighed as if they already knew which side they would take. "You've always been selfish," Valeria said, slamming her fork on her plate. "You wouldn't even be a mother, so you don't understand what it means to care for someone." Beatrice lowered her gaze, feeling the accusation cut deep. That phrase echoed every time she tried to set boundaries. Dinner ended in silence, the kind of silence that sticks to walls and takes a long time to break. Later, alone, Beatrice watched the footage from the cameras on the hallway dashboard. The house, cold and orderly, contrasted with the emotional chaos still vibrating in her mind. Every corner seemed emptier than before. She considered turning off the surveillance system, but something in her instincts stopped her. Valeria's look that night wasn't just anger, it was intent. As the rain began to fall outside, Beatrice sat in her armchair and took a deep breath. Why did everything she did to keep the peace end up creating war? The raindrops hit the glass, and she realized that perhaps the problem wasn't the house, but who she still allowed into it. Have you ever experienced something like this? Being wrongly accused by someone in your own family? So sign up now and activate the bell, because this story will prove to you that sometimes justice begins at home. In the following days, Valeria began showing up unannounced. She'd say she'd forgotten something or come just to chat. Beatrice maintained her composure, trying not to react to the provocations, but she noticed the cameras capturing her sister's every theatrical gesture. During one of the visits, Valeria, noticing the active system, commented, "Even cameras now? Afraid of what, Beatrice?" The ironic tone hid something deeper, calculated provocation. Her parents, over the phone, urged Beatrice to be more flexible. "Your sister's just trying to work, dear," her mother said, her voice sweet and tired. Beatrice took a deep breath before responding, choosing each word carefully not to sound cold, but inside her, exhaustion was building. Years of guilt and compromise had sapped her energy. In her office, surrounded by plants and glowing screens, Beatrice tried to focus on her clients' projects. Lines and measurements seemed the only place where logic still made sense. However, every notification on her phone brought anxiety. A new message from Valeria, a voicemail from her mother, a reminder of the past that insisted on lingering in the present. One rainy afternoon, Valeria burst through the electronic gate, shouting her sister's name. Her voice echoed through the entrance, harsh and theatrical. Beatrice watched on the monitor, feeling her stomach tighten. Instead of leaving, she remained silent, simply observing. It was like watching a rehearsal for a familiar play, Valeria playing the role of the perfect victim. Beatrice finally realized all this manipulation wasn't spontaneous, it was staged. An emotional script written by Valeria and sustained by her parents. That night, she sat in front of the mirror, stared at her own reflection, and murmured, "I'm not what they say I am." It was the first time in years she heard her own voice as an ally. It was a gray morning when Beatrice noticed the gate opening again. Valeria hurried in, feigning concern.
"Are you okay? I texted you yesterday, but you didn't reply," she said, loud enough for the cameras to capture. Beatriz watched her without responding. Something about her sister's posture seemed rehearsed, as if every gesture had a hidden purpose. The conversation became a monologue. Valeria talked about how much she cared, but her eyes didn't match her words. At one point, she raised her voice, provoking Beatriz with vague accusations about isolation, emotional problems, and a lack of empathy. Beatriz took a deep breath, turned her back, and went upstairs, ignoring the provocations. Valeria stormed out, slamming the gate. Minutes later, Beatriz heard a siren in the distance. The sound cut through the air like thunder. The hallway lights came on automatically as she stepped out. Outside, a patrol car pulled up. 2 police officers got out, one holding a clipboard. "Good afternoon, ma'am. We received a call about a possible case of emotional instability," Officer Mendez said, carefully measuring his words. Beatriz felt her heart race, but her expression remained firm. "Please come in, officer. Watch this footage." The silence after this was absolute. She led them into the living room, where the security panel displayed recent footage. The room resembled a makeshift courtroom. Valeria, in the video, screamed, gesticulated, and acted desperate. The officers looked at each other. Mendez crossed his arms and said calmly, "It looks like you have everything under control, actually." Beatriz pressed play again, this time showing other clips. In one of them, Valeria appeared at the gate, looking directly into one of the cameras and whispering something inaudible, a discreet, provocative smile before shouting her sister's name. Mendez wrote it down in his notebook and asked for a copy of the recordings.
"She tried to make a scene, didn't she?" he asked, as the other officer watched silently. Beatriz simply nodded. The officer praised her calm and said he would file the incident as a false risk communication. Outside, Valeria shouted from her car, "She's lying! She needs help!" unaware that the microphone was picking up everything. Beatriz watched her own serenity on the screens, as if observing someone else. She realized for the first time that she was no longer afraid. She felt only a strange peace, the kind that comes when the truth finally reveals itself effortlessly. Mendez thanked her and advised, "Save everything. This might be important later." As the police car pulled away, the street fell silent. Beatriz closed the gate and looked up at the sky, where the sun was beginning to break through the clouds. She felt a tear fall, but not from sadness. It was relief. For the first time, Valeria's narrative crumbled in front of witnesses. Later, Beatriz received a call from her mother. "What did you do, Beatriz? Your sister is devastated. The whole neighborhood is talking about it." The voice was more embarrassed than concerned. Beatriz took a deep breath and replied, "I didn't do anything, Mom. I just showed her what was always there." And for the first time, she hung up the phone without guilt. The following Sunday arrived with the same aroma of coffee and heavy silence. Beatriz was called by her parents to talk and sort things out. Their living room seemed colder than usual. The clock on the wall read 10:05 when she arrived. Valeria was already there, wearing sunglasses, pretending to cry. The drama began again. "Daughter, your sister only wanted the best for you," her father said, avoiding her direct gaze. Her mother added, "She was worried, Beatriz. We all are. You've been distant, cold, silent." The words fell like blades. Beatriz remained motionless, as if observing her own trial without the right to defend herself. Valeria lowered her face, feigning regret. The lump in her throat tightened, but Beatriz didn't give in. "Worried? She exposed me to the police. Do you think that's love?" Her father sighed. "You always take everything to extremes." The weight of decades of manipulation was there, condensed into a single sentence. Everything she'd done since childhood was too much. Studying too much, thinking too much, feeling too much. "I just want peace," Beatriz said, standing up. Her mother's look was a mixture of guilt and disapproval. Peace isn't achieved by accusing your own sister. The sentence ended the conversation like a seal. Beatriz left without looking back. As she walked to the car, she realized that with each step she left something behind: fear, submission, hope. In the rearview mirror, she saw Valeria hugging her mother, pretending to cry. It was a symbolic image, the union built on drama. She understood there was no more room for compromise. In the silence of the drive back, she turned on the radio and, for the first time in years, didn't cry. She simply thought, from now on, it's between me and the truth.
On Monday, Beatriz went to the law firm recommended by a colleague. The lawyer, a man with a calm voice and attentive gaze, listened to everything without interrupting. "You have sufficient evidence," he said as he reviewed the videos. "We can file a case for false reporting of a crime and harassment." The words sounded harsh but liberating. Back home, Beatriz reviewed each recording. Seeing herself in that role of an accused yet firm woman provoked a whirlwind of emotions. As she watched, she realized something new. She no longer saw herself as a victim. Each frame was a reminder that she had been courageous, not just reactive, but conscious. That night, he drafted an email to his lawyer confirming his decision. "I want to proceed with the case." The message seemed simple, but it carried years of submission erased with a single action. The click of send echoed like a silent cry for freedom. While awaiting the outcome of the case, Beatriz returned to work. She tried to fill the void with routines and projects, but something inside her had changed. She was no longer the woman who accepted everything for fear of hurting others. She was someone willing to face the consequences of existing with dignity. Days later, she received an official notification confirming the opening of the case. Her heart pounded, not with fear, but with relief. The camera system, which at once represented control, now symbolized justice. And for the first time, Beatriz slept soundly, without having to justify herself to anyone. News of the complaint spread quickly. In a small town, silence was always the strongest messenger. Within days, everyone knew that Beatriz had brought her own sister to justice. Whispered comments in the hallways, curious glances at the bakery, ambiguous messages from acquaintances. The public trial began even before the official one. Valeria, with her theatrical skill, transformed the narrative. On social media, she posted sad photos, phrases about forgiveness, and vague messages about people who distort the truth. The act worked. Supportive comments flooded her posts, calling her strong and suffering. Beatriz saw it all, but didn't react. Silence was now her weapon. Her parents stopped answering her calls. Her mother, in a brief message, wrote, "I can't understand you anymore." No explanation, no affection, just confirmation that their loyalty had never been balanced. Beatriz took a deep breath and deleted the conversation. With each disconnect, she felt the weight of loneliness, but also the lightness of truth. One afternoon, Chief Inspector Mendez appeared again, this time out of uniform, carrying only a briefcase. "The case will continue. The evidence is solid. You did the right thing." Beatriz invited him in and offered him coffee. It was the first tension-free conversation she'd had in weeks. Mendez discreetly praised her courage. "It's not courage, it's survival," she replied. Mendez smiled. "Maybe one thing leads to another." The words hung in the air, like something Beatriz still needed to believe. That night, looking at her reflection in the window, she realized she was no longer the woman who had silently accepted, and that in itself was a victory.
The day of the hearing arrived with the sky covered in low clouds. Beatriz wore a discreet suit, tied her hair back, and kept her gaze steady. The courthouse seemed colder than any building she had ever designed. In the hallway, she recognized her sister's perfume before even seeing her. Valeria was accompanied by her parents. The trio seemed ready for another act of the old family play. When the judge entered, silence fell. Valeria began her testimony with practiced tears. She said she was only concerned about her sister's mental health and that she never wanted to harm her. Her speech sounded sweet and convincing, but Beatriz had already learned that sometimes venom comes disguised as care. Beatriz's lawyer stood up and, without changing his tone, asked for permission to play the recordings. The lights dimmed partially. On the screen, the truth took shape. Valeria provoking, shouting, trying to force a reaction. The audio captured laughter between insults. The judge maintained his gaze, impassive, but his expression spoke volumes. When the video ended, Valeria could no longer hold back her tears. The silence was almost physical. Beatriz's mother lowered her face. Her father slowly shook his head. The performance was crumbling before everyone's eyes. Beatriz, motionless, felt a chill run down her spine, the kind of chill that comes when you're finally seen. The judge closed the session, saying he would consider the case as a matter of priority. Beatriz left the courtroom without looking back. Outside, the cold wind brought a strange sense of peace. For the first time, she walked without fear of being misunderstood. She no longer needed to prove anything, just exist in her own way. The days after the hearing seemed suspended in time. Beatriz continued to go to work, but the silence in the office was different, no longer one of concentration, but of isolation. Some colleagues avoided commenting on the case. Others looked at her with a mixture of respect and discomfort. The story had already reached beyond the courthouse walls and onto the streets. Valeria disappeared from social media for a few weeks, but the damage was done. Beatriz's parents distanced themselves completely, blocking her on messaging apps. The emptiness of old conversations seemed to echo in every non-existent notification. Beatriz began to realize that the truth, while liberating, also exacts its toll of loneliness. One night, when she arrived home, she found the garden covered in dry leaves. The automatic lights were on, but the room felt sad, exhausted, like her. She sat on the porch with a cup of tea and thought about how that house, the symbol of her independence, had also become the scene of pain. The architecture of freedom now housed memories of war. She began to have nightmares. She saw her sister banging on the gate, screaming her name, and herself watching through the cameras, unable to react. She woke up sweating, her heart racing. The trauma was still there, subtle and persistent, like invisible cracks in the walls of her soul. But at dawn, she always made a point of opening the windows. The light needs to come in, she told herself. It was a simple, almost ritualistic gesture, but it represented her resilience. Despite everything, she was alive, and that, now, was enough. The day of sentencing arrived like a page about to turn. Beatriz sat back in the courtroom. The same cold air, the same white light. Valeria was there, her expression drawn, her hair hastily tied back, her former theatrical glow gone. When the judge entered, everyone stood. The sound of the gavel announced the end. Valeria Ferreira is convicted of false reporting of a crime and harassment. The judge's voice echoed firmly, leaving no room for interpretation. The rest of the words were a blur in Beatriz's mind. Community service, symbolic reparation, a judicial warning. She only heard silence later. A different silence, clean, guiltless. Valeria's gaze met hers for a second. There was no more hatred, only defeat, and perhaps a hint of regret. Beatriz remained motionless, unsmiling. Victory brought no joy, only closure. It was like turning off a light after a show that had lasted too long.
As she left the courthouse, the rain began to fall, fine, almost imperceptible. Beatriz lifted her face to the sky, letting the drops wash away the weight of the last few months. She felt, finally, light. Not because everything had been resolved, but because nothing more needed to be proven. That night, back home, he wrote in his diary, "I have won, but I have lost everything." And strangely, that is where peace lies. He lay down and, before falling asleep, turned off the security system. For the first time, there was no fear. Just silence, the good kind, the one that comes when the soul finally rests. Beatriz spent the next few days observing every corner of the house, as if saying goodbye to an old friend. The white walls, the wooden floors, and the faint scent of jasmine, everything brought back memories. Each room seemed to contain echoes of a lifetime, and even the beautiful things now carried the weight of exhaustion. The house, built to be a refuge, had become a silent witness to an emotional hell. She began packing her belongings one by one. Old blueprints, house plans she'd drawn for clients, architecture books, everything seemed to have a new function, to remind her of who she was before all this. In each box she placed not only objects, but also layers of memories she no longer wanted to carry. Curious neighbors quietly commented on the change. Some looked with pity, others with admiration. But Beatriz no longer cared about the looks. She had learned the hard way that other people's opinions are the first foundation of an emotional prison, and she was finally breaking down every brick of this invisible cell.
One afternoon, she sat on the living room floor, surrounded by boxes, and looked out the large window where she had so often gazed out at the garden. The sun streamed in at perfect angles, as if shining just for her. She smiled, without tears, only gratitude. The house had served its purpose, now it was time to let it go. When she handed the keys to the real estate agent, she felt a lump in her throat. "You designed it, didn't you?" the woman asked, admiring the structure's details. "Yes," Beatrice replied with a half smile. "And now it will belong to another story." Deep down, she knew that, in a way, this was also a way to continue living through what she had built. The road stretched out before her like a promise. Beatrice drove with the radio playing low, the wind cutting through the half-open windows. The landscape slowly changed, buildings giving way to hills, horns replaced by birdsong. For the first time in a long time, the future didn't seem like a threat, but a fertile ground of possibilities. She chose a town near the mountains, known for its tranquility and mild climate. She rented a small apartment with large windows and a balcony overlooking the sunset. For the first few days, the silence seemed strange, not the tense silence of her old house, but the pure, welcoming silence that comes when the world demands nothing of you. Each morning was a new beginning. Beatrice strolled through the square, visited bakeries, and chatted with discreet neighbors. People didn't know her past, and that was liberating. She could just be an ordinary woman, drinking coffee and sketching dreams on napkins. The lightness of anonymity was a gift. Over time, he began to reconnect with his art. He began drawing by hand again, something he hadn't done in years. The lines flowed naturally, without pressure, without purpose beyond pleasure. It was as if, as he redrew lines and shapes, he was also redrawing himself. One serene night, as she watched the city lights reflect off the mountains, Beatrice thought, "Peace is not the absence of pain. It is learning to exist after it." And for the first time, she smiled with true lightness. There was no more fear. There was no more past. There was only now. And that was enough. Time began to flow differently. The days no longer had the same urgency as before.
Beatriz would wake up early, drink coffee on the balcony, and watch the city gain color. The sun rising behind the mountains reminded her that even after the darkest nights, light always returns. Little by little, restlessness gave way to harmony, not because the world had changed, but because she had finally learned to inhabit it. With the money from the sale of the house, he opened a small architecture studio. The space was simple: light walls, plants, and a large wooden table. He named the place Aurora Workshop, not coincidentally, the same name he would give to the daughter he never had. There, he began serving clients who were looking for more than projects. They wanted spaces that exuded peace.
In her lectures, Beatriz began to talk about how a home is not what you build on the outside, but what you protect on the inside. Her words, previously restrained, now flowed with sweetness and conviction. The audience was moved by the calm of someone who had weathered the storm. She didn't talk about Valeria or her parents. She didn't need to. The silence between sentences said it all. One afternoon, while reviewing a house plan, she noticed something curious. All her new homes had large windows and open hallways. None had high gates, cameras, or locks. It was as if, unconsciously, Beatriz was projecting the freedom she had previously feared allowing. At the end of each day, she wrote in her journal, "Today I drew a house that smiles," she once noted. And when she closed the notebook, she realized she had finally transformed pain into art. The architecture of her life, once built on fear, now stood on the firm foundations of truth and peace. It was an ordinary night when the past returned, without warning, as it always did. Beatriz was working late, reviewing a project, when she heard a new notification. She glanced at her computer and saw the name she hadn't expected: Valeria Ferreira. The subject of the email was simple, almost banal: "We need to talk." For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Beatriz's heart beat faster, as if reliving years condensed into seconds. Her hands trembled on the keyboard. She opened the message slowly, as if afraid to open an old wound. The words were few. "I've changed. I just want to talk, no fighting. I want to see you. No apology, no explanation." She stared at the screen in silence. 1,000 responses came to mind, some harsh, some gentle, all useless. After all, what was there left to say? He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. She caught the faint scent of the lavender candle burning beside the table and noticed how its aroma contrasted with the old scent of tension and fear. She got up, went to the balcony, and looked at the horizon. The cool wind caressed her hair, and the distant sound of the city brought a sense of permanence. The past might call, but the present didn't shout. It merely welcomed. For the first time, Beatriz understood that forgiveness isn't a reunion. It's a silent liberation. Back at his desk, she opened her email again. She smiled, closed the tab, and didn't reply. Instead, she opened a new project and typed the title, Horizon House, a home with wide windows, no walls. Life went on, and she finally knew how to design it. Years had passed since the trial. The small town and the family scandal were no longer part of anyone's conversations. Time had done what it always does: dilute, erase, transform pain into a distant memory. Beatriz was now a respected professional, with Atelier Aurora growing and her lectures being invited to other cities. But more than success,
She had achieved something money never bought: serenity.
One sunny afternoon, he received an unexpected invitation to participate in an exhibition about architecture and truth in his old town. He hesitated before accepting. His heart raced, not out of fear, but out of respect for the scar that still lingered somewhere in it. After a few days, he decided to go. "I no longer run from who I was," he wrote in his diary. The journey was silent. Familiar landscapes appeared outside the window, bringing back memories of a life that seemed to belong to someone else. Upon arriving in the city, everything seemed smaller. The streets, the houses, even time itself. It was as if the world had shrunk while expanding within. At the exhibition, people approached with curiosity. Beatriz spoke lightly about how building healthy spaces begins with destroying the ones that make us sick. The audience listened in silence. When she finished, a man approached, a simple suit, a firm gaze. It was Chief Inspector Mendez. "I knew you'd be okay," he said with a tight smile. "I was happy when I saw your name in the catalog." Beatriz smiled back. "Thank you for believing in me when no one else did." He lowered his gaze modestly. "I did nothing but the right thing, but you were the one who freed yourself." They walked to the exit together. The rain was beginning to fall, fine and gentle, just like the day of the sentencing. Beatriz lifted her face, feeling the drops touch her skin. Mendez waved goodbye discreetly and continued on his way. She stood for a moment watching the reflection of the city lights dance in the puddles. He got into the car, but didn't start the engine. He just watched the rain fall on the windshield, remembering the words he had said that fateful day. "Please come in, officer. Watch this footage." Those words, spoken in despair, had become a symbol of his strength. Now there were no cameras, no trials, no spectators. Just her, whole, alive, at peace. The past, at last, was no longer a prison, but a foundation. Every tear, every loss, every silence had become part of the fabric of the woman she had become. Before leaving, she looked one last time at the city through the fogged-up window. She smiled tenderly. There was no more resentment, only understanding. "It all happened to teach me to stand up," she thought. And as she turned the car key, her soul felt light, like someone closing the last door of an old home. As the rain fell gently, the horizon ahead seemed to open up into 1,000 paths. Beatriz drove slowly, breathing deeply. The world outside waited, and she was finally ready to inhabit it. Beatriz won when she had the courage to free herself, even if it meant being alone. And you, what would you do in her place? Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share this story with anyone who needs a reminder. Peace is worth more than any appearance.